Two incredible visionary leaders will have a conversation about catalyzing change around reproductive justice. Heather Booth, American civil rights activist, activist and political strategist who was just named one of the 50 over 50 by Forbes magazine. And Rabbi Tamar Manasseh, CEO and founder of Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killing, a member of JWFNY's collective, Cohort 2. I welcome you to the stage.
We were ordinary women trying to save women's lives, but
we were criminals. We were felons. For most of the nation in 72, abortion was illegal.
We had to go underground.
The woman would be given the address to the front.
It was probably obvious to neighbors what was going on.
We came to the surface from other things, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement.
you couldn't not pay attention to what was going on.
Fetal death is murder.
You could not work as a pregnant woman. If you weren't married, you were out of luck.
They were terrible situations.
The septic abortion word was full every day.
Women did awful things.
They were literally dying because they were women.
So we thought we can be of use. I said, we could use my phone, but change it so that they don't ask for Eleanor. How about Jane? Nobody's called Jane anymore.
We had the phone numbers on bulletin boards around Chicago. Pregnant, call Jane.
The clientele included daughters, wives, mistresses of police, state's attorney, judges.
It dawned on me how big an issue this was.
Jane was an outrageous undertaking by a lot of smart women.
I was not there to pass judgment.
I knew there were women like me.
Under the radar of the Chicago mafia and police department.
We were all being watched. The phone rings. A man says, we know where you are.
There were 11 counts of conspiracy to commit abortion, 110 years for each of us. So that's a long time.
That might have ended Jane right then and there.
I couldn't see myself sitting on the sidelines.
We were building a new world, one woman at a time.
Sometimes you have to stand up to illegitimate authority. And sometimes they're unjust laws that need to be challenged.
My goodness. Hello? Yes, it's on. Oh my goodness, one more time for Heather Booth and the Jane. How many of you felt inspired by that trailer you just saw? Right? How many of you did it absolutely just set on fire? So when I first saw it, I was outraged, and I don't do outrage very well. I mean, I have to get like active because I can't yell at the television for an extended period of time. So I saw the movie one day and I literally made everybody I know watch it. And I was like, where are the Janes now? We need them now. I threw up the bat signal for you and you didn't answer. So I'm Googling and I'm trying to find the Janes, and I'm like, you know what? Well, we're just gonna have to reboot it. We're gonna have to bring them out of retirement. On a car ride from Chicago to Mississippi, I don't know, Ruth is amazing. And Ruth is like the Jewish, like white pages. Ruth is the Jewish Google. She knows everyone. It's like if you say, Ruth, I need to get in touch with the Pope, she'll say, hey, you know, it might take him a couple days to get back with you, but I'm going to introduce you guys over email. Ruth, I called her and I told her what I wanted to do. And literally within an hour, I was in contact with Heather. And that was the true spirit of the collective. That is Lador Vador. That was just how fast she made it happen for me. And I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have reached you without her. So I would have had nowhere for all my rage to go if it wasn't for you and Ruth. So thank you two for that very much.
I thank all of you. I feel like saying, Miss Baca, I'm with family. I came to all here. The family I've known, the family I'm part of, the family that we will build together.
Yes.
I came here, even this few days before the election, which I'm very involved in, because our speakers. I came here because I see the promise of what you are building. Yes, the donors and doers together. And the main lesson that I want to share with you and that I take from you is that when we act together, when we organize with love at the center, we have changed this world and we will change this world. And you are the people who are the world changers. So I thank you. You are the ones who are inspiring me. Oh, and Tamar, she told the story of how she was in touch with me. I actually knew about her before. I was shown a movie about this crazy woman who would go on. Oh, could you hear me before? Yes, yes. But is this better? That would, I saw she would go to the blocks where there was the worst elements of violence in the city of Chicago, where I lived much of my life, and bring grandmothers and parents and help the little kids and have breakfast and food and caring for them. And then on Jewish holidays would celebrate. But oh my God.
I am about a good party. I am about a party.
And so Tamar, I have come here in part to see her in person and to realize she gave me this band that says, "We are Jane." I want to say, I am Tamar, I am you, we are us, we are all together.
Oh my God.
Oh, I just love you. Next time.
You are just all sorts of spectacular and amazing and good stuff, aren't you? So hard to follow that. So I think the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you feel when you had to dust off your cape and bring Jane out of the closet again? How did you feel when this fight that you fought a long time ago and you won, how did you feel when it reared its ugly head again?
I realized that women's lives would be thwarted, that some would be injured, some would die, and that it also represented a change of direction, that I believe we are now in a moment of a historic change of direction. I don't think that's true most of the time. I think for 50 years, we've been moving in one direction, mostly advancing freedom and justice and democracy, setbacks and moving forward, somewhat more inclusive society, moving forward, much further to go. But there is now a threat in the US and internationally that in fact puts us in danger. We're on a knife's edge, but the future isn't written. On the one hand, there is this threat to reproductive freedom, the most intimate decision that a person can make in our lives about when or whether or with whom we have a child. What is more personal than that? Most of the people who choose abortions already have children, so we know what it means to bring a child into this world. But it's the freedom to make this decision is also threatened with the freedom of expansion of the right to vote, which people have struggled and died for. It's a question of, will there be political violence to overturn an election that we know came out with the people who actually won the most votes? It's the threats to every freedom and the sense of dignity and having a caring society at all.
That's on one side of the knife's edge, but there is another side. We can have an even greater caring society. That's what you represent, a caring and more inclusive society, generation to generation. And I'm so glad about the next generation. I'm 77. I started when I was a young teenager. And for the people who are younger, please, I am so glad you are carrying it on. And those who are the donors who have been activists or organizers for so many years, thank you, the women and men of goodwill who are here to support this next generation so that we do carry it on. If there are just 2 more votes in the Senate, we will codify Roe. We will pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We can get assault weapons off the street. There is so much more that we can do, not just legislatively, but as a society for how we understand and relate to each other. We are on a knife's edge. And so when I heard about the decision, mostly I wasn't surprised. There's been a chipping away state by state, rule by rule, year by year. And I've also seen the organizing that we've done. And when we've organized in the past, we have changed this world. And through your support and your models and your work, you are the hope, or part of the hope for the future. And we will change this world. Every question that I wanted to ask you, you just like answer them before I ask them. So like, this is like turning over and over again in my head. But how old were you when you started the Janes? I was 19. 19. And at 19, think about the young women, even in my lifetime. I was born a couple of years after Roe passed. And I've always known in my lifetime, I've always had that freedom because of people like you. And I feel that sometimes young women who have had that freedom their whole life, they don't really know what's coming. They don't know what it looked like pre-Roe in this country. What would you say to 19-year-olds just like you? What would you say to them right now? What do they need to be doing right now? They need to have confidence in themselves, in each other, and in our dreams. One of the main things I think that holds us back is our sense of insecurity. Senses we're not good enough. We don't know enough. We're not smart enough. We're not pretty enough. We're not tall enough. We're not enough. And everything in the society tells us that. And part of the beauty of this gathering is we tell each other, together, we can figure this out. Together we are more than enough. We are, I think it was Gloria Steinem who said, we are the leaders we have been waiting for. When I was 19, I already had the experience of the most dynamic movement of modern times, and that was of the civil rights movement. In 1964, I went to Mississippi with the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project. Many of you, those of you who've heard about it, you raise your hand. What I'm finding is that many in the next generation do not know about it. Some of you may even have been part of it or supported it. I went to my temple. I was told I had to raise $500 in order to be part of it and go down to Mississippi. That would be used for a bail fund. And then was arrested and I stayed in jail. That wasn't the bail fund. How many times have you been arrested? I do want to know that. I'll come back to that because arrest is just, but I want to tell the lesson, and even that first time, but I went to my temple to help raise the funds and went to some other things. But the Freedom Summer Project, I want to share the lesson I learned from it. Absolutely. In 1964, Northern students were recruited to go to Mississippi to support the work of white supremacist terrorism that was frightening, threatening, and often murdering people in Mississippi who were trying to register to vote and do other parts of what should be a normal part of the society. You may have heard about the project particularly because 3 of the young volunteers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, were killed at the hands of the Klan. But because we organized within a year, there was a Voting Rights Act. I took that lesson back with me to Chicago. I was at the university there, and realized that if you organize, you can change the world. A friend on campus then told me that she was pregnant, or her brother told me she was pregnant. She wasn't even talking about it. And she was nearly suicidal and wasn't prepared to have a child and was looking for someone to provide an abortion. I hadn't thought about the issue before. It's maybe hard to remember, but those of my generation, I didn't even talk about sex except with the most intimate friends, let alone talk about abortion. And 3 people talking about planning an abortion in Chicago was a conspiracy to commit a felony, which I didn't exactly know at the time, but I learned later. So I found a doctor, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, who had been a freedom fighter in Mississippi, who came to Chicago when his name was on a Klan death list because he fought for the exploring who had actually killed Emmett Till. There's this remarkable movie that's coming up about the teenager who was killed in Mississippi, one of many. And he performed the abortion. I thought it was a good deed, and it was over. The procedure was successful. But then word spread, and someone else called. I set up the relationship with Dr. Howard again, and word spread, and someone else called. And I realized this is a real problem, which I didn't know about. I've never had to face it myself. And so I set up a system. Over time, so many women were coming through. I recruited others to be part of it, some of whom are the remarkable women in this film, some of whom I had never met in person because it went on for several years. This was in 1965 that I started it. And then we decided, as it said in the film, to call it Jane, so that we didn't say, we had signs that said, pregnant, don't want to be, call Jane, and had a phone number. Brilliant. Over time, so many people came through that the women themselves learned how to do the procedures, and the women of Jane performed 11,000 abortions before Roe, ending finally just before Roe in 1972. And so what I learned, because also people organized, we did win Roe when we stood up to illegitimate authority, and we organized, building a caring community with love at the center, and we helped to change the world. Oh, I'm done. She never got to tell us how many times she got arrested. There's a story there, but never mind. Okay. Okay. Oh, the story. So I was with another Jane last week. She had been arrested 27 times throughout all the movements. So what's your count? Because there is a story. I've heard the stories about you guys, like, really the police knowing what you were doing and sometimes looking the other way and sometimes not. At one point, my husband and I, and he'd been a leader of the anti-war movement and a community leader in the community. My husband and I lived with 2 other friends, partly and who was the head of the civil rights movement, Al Raby, who was the head of the civil rights movement in Chicago, and his wife, Jane, not Jane, Pat Novick, who's also became one of the Janes. And we had a police car that stayed out in front of our house. We lived in the same apartment for protection. We didn't have any money. We were going to raise our kids together. And there was a police car out in the front of the house. And we said, they got 4 for the price of 1. But what I didn't want it, there are many more things to talk about arrests. So it's one tactic. It's a tactic. And you have to decide whether it's useful or not. The first time I was arrested, I was in Mississippi at 18, scared about just about everything and what I create problems for other people. I was holding a sign just saying freedom now while there was a voter registration drive. I wasn't doing civil disobedience. And that was the first time I was arrested.
I've then been involved in other arrests for, on campaigns that I've helped to run on immigration reform, on financial issues, on labor issues. And the most recent time was with Jane Fonda around the Fire Drill Fridays, around the environmental crisis. But it's one tactic. And the real question is not how risk-taking you are. It's not, in fact, I'll end with this. In Mississippi, we used to say, people used to ask you, are you willing to die for freedom? Take risks for freedom. And though I was willing to, though I wanted to live very much, I think now the question really is, are you willing to live for freedom? Are you willing to do the work every day when it's too hot or too cold or we're too tired or we're too bored? And you are the people who do the work. So I thank you all.
Thank you, Heather. That was nothing but good things.
Thank you so much, Heather and Tamar. You are true examples of visionary leadership and you inspire us all. You knew something had to be done, and despite your discomfort and sometimes your peril, being arrested and otherwise, you did it. This is what all these women in the room do. They see a need in the world and they step in to do something. After lunch, we'll have a panel on reproductive justice and examine how far we've come and how far we still have to go. And we'll also give you some concrete suggestions and actions you can take to help ensure that we put the Jane network out of business once again.
I believe in doing the commercial. So you all saw Tamar's shirt, which says Jane. Where is Kim Charles, who's a supporter of the foundation? Stand up. Look at her t-shirt. So go on Tamar's website and you too can be Jane.
On Tamar's website? Well, how do we get the Jane t-shirts? Everyone wants to know. Oh, wearegene.org. Get your Jane t-shirt.